substances that play critical roles in our mental activity. And with an understanding of the biological, chemical processes that are involved in the function of the brain, gives us a lot of insight into the development or insight into developing treatments for psychological disorders, correcting brain chemistry, the neurotransmitter imbalances and things like that can alleviate a lot of severe psychological symptoms or disorders, okay? This, without any words, is how our brain works. The neurons communicating with each other. Remember we said that the brain is an electrochemical system. And it's the influx of positive ions in and out of the neuronal body that creates an action potential, travels down to, and we'll look more at this in the chapter on biology, but when it gets down to the end and it spits out neurotransmitters into the synapse, and then those neurotransmitters go and attach themselves to certain receptors on the postsynaptic dendrite that then causes action potential to travel down the next neuron. Okay, so remember we talked about reductionism, reducing things down to its parts, reducing us down to that level. At least that's what makes you you. That's what makes you actually be able to do and act and so forth, is that electrochemical reaction going on. There's neurons firing in your brain. Obviously an oversimplistic explanation, but at the most fundamental level, that's what's going on. Okay. The human genome. We've recently mapped the whole human genome. And so we then have developed certain techniques for discovering the links between genes and behavior. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that your genetics predetermines that you're going to behave a certain way, but there is a strong genetic component of behavior. And then we're beginning to understand now how situational contexts influence how genes are expressed. You have an underlying DNA code that's fixed, but in interacting with the environment, certain genes are switched on and certain genes are switched off, and we call that epigenetics. We'll get into that as well.
When I look at this, and these are 3 billion chemical letters, instructions for a human being, my eyes glaze over. But when scientist Eric Landon looks at this, he sees stories. The genome is a storybook that's been edited for a couple billion years. And you can take it to bed like 1,001 Arabian Nights and read a different story in the genome every night. This is the story of one of the greatest scientific adventures ever. And at the heart of it is a small, very powerful molecule, DNA. For the past 10 years, scientists all over the world have been painstakingly trying to read the tiny instructions buried inside our DNA. And now, finally, the human genome has been decoded.
We're at the moment the scientists are waiting for. This is what we wanted to do. You know, we're now examining and interpreting the genetic code.
This is the ultimate imaginable thing that one could do scientifically, is to go and look at our own instruction book and then try to figure out what it's telling us.
And what it's telling us is so surprising and so strange and so unexpected. 50% of the genes in a banana are different from a banana. I feel I can say this with some irony, very different from a banana. You may feel I eat a banana. All the machinery for replicating your DNA, all the machinery for controlling the cell cycle, the cell surface, for making nutrients. All that's the same.
So what does any of this information have to do with you or me? Perhaps more than we could possibly imagine. Which one of us will get cancer, or arthritis, or Alzheimer's? Will there be cures? Will parents in the future be able to determine their children's genetic destinies?
We've opened the box here that has got a huge amount of valuable information. It is the key to understanding disease and in the long run to curing disease. But having opened it, we're also going to be very uncomfortable with that information for some time to come.
So this is a big thing, a very big thing. And then it's not only the mapping of the genetic code, but then also the discovery of epigenetics, the non-DNA expression of genes. And we can watch the brain in action. Since the late 1980s, we've been able to study the work of the brain as it is performing certain psychological functions, and we can see which areas of the brain are activated in certain activities, physical, mental activities, things like that. And we found that there's sometimes many brain regions participate to produce mental activity and behavior.
Hello, I'm Susan Turner. In this film, we're going to explore some of what we know about this amazing treasure all of us carry under our skulls and how we know about it. Neuroscience is the scientific study of the structure and function of the nervous system. In this film, we will be concentrating on the brain. These microscopic cells, neurons, are the building blocks of the brain and form a communication network. Rather than approaching neuroscience by looking at individual neurons, my colleagues, graduate students, and I, here at the Brain Mapping Center at UCLA, look at how assemblies of neurons work together to form functional units. We can measure the brain's electrical response to a single event and see how it unfolds over a time scale of milliseconds. Measurements of those electrical responses are called event-related potentials, or ERPs. This is the PET, or positron emission tomography scanner. A positron, a positively charged electron, is attached to a molecule using a machine called a cyclotron, which is a nuclear accelerator. Tomography refers to making a picture or tomograph of specific slices of tissue. The blood carries the radioactive glucose throughout the body and into the brain. The colored areas show where there is more glucose metabolism taking place, indicating healthy brain tissue. In these PET scans, red indicates the most glucose metabolic activity, yellow somewhat less, green even less, and blue minimal. Contrast that to this one of a person with Alzheimer's disease, whose brain shows a dramatic decrease in the metabolism, indicating widespread death of brain tissue. Conversely, this PET scan is from a person with an aggressive brain tumor, and you can see that this area is receiving more glucose than it normally would. In fMRI, the F refers to functional. We scan continuously, taking a complete picture about every 2 seconds. With the invention of very fast MRI imaging in the early 1990s, it is now possible to take a picture of a whole brain in a second or two.
So there's different ways that we can see the brain in action, and each of those developments in an ever-increasing sophistication. Functional MRI allowed us to do more so than the PET scan. You didn't have to take any type of radiated glucose or anything like that. You just take somebody. Anybody had an MRI done? Yeah. Only thing about it, you got to go into a tube and can't move. And I got in there, and they had me in a position. I had a pinched nerve or something, and then my nose started itching. And so it's great, but it's not very comfortable. Right? For instance, we'll talk about this later. Phelps and Bandagy had done some research into racial attitudes And then, despite what a person might say, we can look at their brain in action and see if maybe what they're saying doesn't line up with the way that their brain activity indicates. And so that was a benefit of being able to see the brain in action in studying racial attitudes. All right, here's a question. The functional MRI study by Phelps and Banerjee demonstrated that psychological scientists can, hopefully you have read ahead and read the research by Phelps and Banerjee, and you can answer this question. So, their research using functional MRI demonstrated that psychological scientists can what? Change racial attitudes, or know the cause of racial prejudice, or measure the amount of racism relative to prejudice, or see inside the brain with regard to the perceptions of race. Loud? D? Yeah, it allows us to see the brain in action with the perception of race. They showed some folks pictures of black and white, and then some other objects, and they were able to see the brain in action. Okay. Now, this gentleman, who is this fella? Yeah, Charles Darwin. And Darwin, back in, here's the fifth part of psychological science theme. He wrote The Origin of Species, right? 1859. He made a bold prediction. In the distant future, I see open fields for far more important researches. Psychology will be based on a new foundation, down the necessary requirement of each mental power and capacity by gradation. That is through natural selection. Okay. Unfortunately, that prediction didn't pan out until really recent times. But we've now started to turn to an evolutionary understanding of, and especially biology. The biology that you'll be dealing with as your major, the whole foundational theory underlying biology is evolution. Okay. The mind is adaptive. It's evolved over millions of years to solve problems related to survival and reproduction, which are the main selection pressures in the evolutionary development of an organism. And the mind is both adaptive in biological and cultural terms. There's genetic mutations and natural selection. Who can explain? I guess I should pick on somebody. Is Christopher Gleaton here? Christopher? Okay. How about Whitney Holt? Whitney? Whitney? I guess people thought that I didn't mean this, but yeah, that's. Katie Decker? Do I have the right class? Oh, no wonder I don't. I have to make sure I take those scratches off. Let's try again. I never claim to be perfect. Okay. Let's see. Kenzie Kemp. Kenzie. Natural selection. Can you explain natural selection as far as evolution goes? Sure. You had it in high school, right? You had biology and so forth in high school. Natural selection. It's really easy. Come on, work with me here. I'm sure you got some kind of a rudimentary grasp of it. Try to elaborate on it. Doesn't have to be biologically perfect description. Natural selection. Say, as far as evolution goes, evolutionary development of an organism. Over time, natural selection works on organisms. What is the nature of that action? Okay, how? Go on. An organism, an organism is, for it to survive in a particular environment, it's going to need what to survive in that environment? Certain abilities to do what? And what do we need to survive? Food. So then an adaptation would be something that would enable us to take in resources, right? And process them, and then elimination. And then also, what does an organism need to survive besides the ability to take in resources? Over a long period of time. Not just grow. Let's branch out from the individual more to a group. Reproduce. You need to reproduce, right? So that's the selection pressures, is what? Survival and reproduction. Okay? And so an organism has certain characteristics, and if they facilitate what? Survival and reproduction, then that organism keeps on what? Perpetuating and so forth. Now, what happens if the environment changes? It has to change with it, but is there somebody with a steering wheel that's causing it to, or what? How does that adaptation occur? Evolution. How does I've got right there there's genetic mutations is one way. I mean, people are born all the time, but there's mutations that causes a new thing. Like one day, some baby's born and it has feathers. Okay? And we might laugh at it, and then all of a sudden, instead of global warming, we can get an ice age. And that little baby has feathers, and it's all nice and warm. It carries its own down coat and suit and everything, right? And everybody else dies off, but it can reproduce. You see what's going on? That's a simplified thing, okay? So that's natural selection. And it's not just physically like feathers, it's also psychologically the mental functions and capacities that we have that allow us to survive and reproduce, okay? So the mind is adaptive. In a micro sense of adaptability, when this little child has started crawling, and he crawls, if he's crawling here on these steps, and he gets to here, what does he discover? The laws of gravity, right? Now, he can't say, oh, eureka, the laws of gravity. But he learns what? That if there's a perceptual drop-off, what might happen? Right? And so you take a little boy, a little girl that's experimented with the surroundings around them, and then stick them on here where there's a glass plate And he could crawl across there, and Mama's over here saying, come on, what does he do? He's not going to go. He knows what? That's a perceptual cliff there. And he knows not to go across, even though he can't quite reason out yet that the glass, you know, is, even though it's transparent, it will hold him up. Now, if you were to take a baby that 9, 10 months has just, you know, been crawling and quite hadn't figured it all out yet, they will do what? Yeah, they go scooting across there. Okay, that's what gets them in trouble, because they hadn't adapted quite yet. But the mind is adaptable. Okay. So from that aspect of psychological development by gradation over time, based on evolutionary theory, we can determine whether human mechanisms are adaptive. And there's adaptations that we talked about, and then there's, and don't worry about this, maybe the biology major will get into it later, but the exaptations and spandrels, these are things that we might possess that didn't necessarily or for a particular function, but we can use them in another way, and it just sort of happened, okay? It's called co-opted. And so, and I mentioned feathers a while ago, and that's exactly what happened. Feathers developed originally not for flight, but for thermal regulation. And then a byproduct of that was those feathers are fairly light, and they allow lift and things like that, okay? So, psychologically, and as far as humans go, we need to be aware of the challenges of our ancestors in order to understand our current behavior, such as a predilection for sweet and fatty foods. Because there's and we'll get into this, and this thing of evolution, it runs throughout the semester. How many of you got a sweet tooth? Man, I do too. Now, is it good? No. Ask Paula Dean. Right? Ask Paula Dean. Anciently, let's go. My model was 40,000 years ago, Paleolithic times. Were there any Reese's Pieces and Bluebell ice cream? And no. As far as sweets go, the only thing sweet would have been really sweet would have been honey. Okay, and that's surrounded by what? Thousands of bees, and so you didn't just go and grab your honey anytime you wanted to. That's a concerted effort and a lot of danger and so forth. Fruit, ancient fruit was not very sweet. We've refined it today to tailor it to our sweet tooth. But carbohydrates were kind of scarce. But what we do gravitate towards is fat, protein, right? And so the problems that weren't problems yesteryear are now problems today, because now sweets, carbohydrates, and so forth are readily available. And genetically, we really hadn't changed yet to match this new environment that we created. Now, let me ask you this. So, and I want to spend some time with this, but there's a lot of times, the theory of evolution is still controversial. Still controversial. How many of you, and you don't have to raise your hand, but this is just for discussion's sake, how many of you just sort of, I kind of reject this thing about evolution? Anybody? Or care to admit it, or what? You do? Okay. Anybody else? Okay, a couple. Okay, there's about 3. Okay. And the rest of you, I guess, do believe or accept it, or do we have fish riders? And
It's a theory.
okay. Go ahead.
No, I mean, until it's not a fact, it's a theory. So as long as it's looked at that way, look at it.
Well, really, in science, there are no facts.
Well, that's not true.
Yeah.
Water takes to it.
Yeah, but there's absolutely in science theories, you never prove a theory right. You can only prove a theory wrong. Okay? It used to be believed that an atom was the most irreducible particle of matter. Okay? And then all of a sudden we found out. But up until then, the thing is that if you have a theory, like when we do research, and we have a hypothesis, and we seem to support it, and we might develop a theory. According to, at least, if you look at Karl Popper, the scientist philosopher, you really have never truly proven anything. You've just failed to disprove it. You catch the difference there? Okay?
I think what I'm talking about, though, is the same reason that we used to be taught that dinosaurs stood upright, all the things that have been taught wrong, all scientists. If you're going to teach something, teach it as a theory, then teach it as a theory. Don't accept it and say, this is what it is, this is why we have to do it. It's a theory. And I understand what you're saying, you can only prove something false. But in logic, negative, you can't prove it. So it's a circle.
Well, a strong science is falsifiability. Okay, a strong, and when we get into the next chapter on research, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about theories and hypotheses and things like that, and what makes a strong theory, and what makes a weak theory, and so forth. But evolution just means change. Okay, evolution just means change, and there's a psychologist. His name just escaped me. We'll get to him later on. Kurt Lewin. He was a gestalt and then a social psychologist. He said, "There's nothing so useful as a good theory." Okay, and so evolution is a very, very, very strong theory. It's very usable and so forth. There may come a time where we might refine it, something to come along with a better theory. But right now, is it perfect? No, there are no perfect theories that explain everything. Okay, there's no way.
The colloquial use of the word theory, like a theory about why your car won't start, or a conspiracy theory, is not the same as a scientific theory, like atomic theory or germ theory. To a scientist, a theory is something that explains and interprets facts. Anyone who says evolution is only a theory probably doesn't understand the difference, or is hoping that you don't. There is a lot of misunderstanding about the theory of evolution, so let's emphasize what it is not. Evolution has nothing to do with where the universe came from. That's cosmology. Evolution is not a theory of how life on Earth began. That's abiogenesis. All it deals with is how living things change over time. Evolution by natural selection is based on 3 simple ideas. 1, variation. 2, heritability. 3, differential reproductive success. In other words, organisms reproduce with variations. Those offspring tend to resemble their parents, and some of them will reproduce more than others. If you've got those, you've got evolution. This process explains the unity and diversity of living things today. By now, there are literally millions of separate facts from fields as diverse as paleontology, embryology, comparative anatomy, and genetics that support the theory. A good way to understand why scientists are so confident in the theory is to look at the remarkable similarities in phylogenetic trees based on different data. Molecular biologists can construct a tree based on variations in a protein sequence, hemoglobin for example. This tree will overlap one based on geographical distribution and a fossil record, which will in turn correlate to one based on bone structure, and so on. Evolution is change in genetic frequencies over time, and this process explains the similarities and differences amongst all living things. While scientists may disagree with some of the underlying details of how evolution works, there is no debate whatsoever in the scientific community that evolution is a fact, and the theory of evolution is how we understand it.
So it just means change. It just means change. And so usually what he mentioned was either you might have a conflict with cosmology or abiogenesis. In other words, where did the universe come from, and then where did life come from? Which really evolution doesn't deal with that at all. Evolution just picks up past that point and talks about change over time. And here's proof. So there, in a few short seconds, is Homer Simpson's explanation of evolution. Just change from an organism, survival and reproduction. Okay. Now, one thing, and I won't belabor the point. A lot of times there's this big war between science and religion that really doesn't have to be there, and really the argument's more of cosmology and abiogenesis that was mentioned earlier. But in the biblical text, in the book of Genesis, there is a description of creation and so forth. And what does the Bible say in the very first sentence? All right, I tricked you. That's what your translation says. Okay? That's what your translation says. Actually, what the text says is something different. And it's Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. Okay? That's Hebrew. That's what the text was originally written in. Okay? And so when you take the text in Hebrew, which is a very abstract and ambiguous type language, it's beautiful language, it's very simple, not near as complicated. You can learn Hebrew easier than you can learn English. Okay? When you take the biblical account, you can actually find support through the book of Genesis for the different geological time scales and so forth. It's very interesting, okay? So I guess usually the big battle is between folks that tend to gravitate to one side or the other. Usually the scientists are atheists, and then the religious side are in a big war and all that. And it really doesn't have to be that way, okay? Once you really look at the biblical text in its original language and break it down through some abstractness and so forth. And so it's not a problem for me, and I don't worry about it. I have no problems with, evolution, and it's helped me to understand psychology and to a tremendous degree. But the other arguments are the cosmology and the abiogenesis, okay? I like this cartoon, Great Moments in Evolution. Here the fish were playing baseball and somebody hit a home run, and it caused them to what? They're going to have an adaptation somewhere along, and they're allowed to climb up on land and get the baseball. Okay. Now another aspect. Here's the question. Okay. Which of the following is not considered one of the three developments in the biological revolution that helped guide psychological science? Was it developments in understanding brain chemistry, the Human Genome Project, evolutionary evidence that proves that the mind developed from the brain, or brain stem methods which allow scientists to watch a working brain. C, yeah. Yeah. That's not considered one of the three developments, okay? Perhaps. All right. Now, this next aspect of the mind being adaptable, we talked about the biological aspects, but there's another big factor, and that's culture, okay? Culture. Culture provides adaptive solutions between us and the environment. Okay. In a culture, there's artifacts, which are tangible items, say like furniture, buildings, things like that. Then there's spouse values that a culture has. So like we're a democracy, and our culture values certain aspects of democracy. And then there are certain underlying assumptions about the nature of time, the nature of reality, the nature of truth, things like that. And these aspects of artifacts and the spouse values, underlying assumptions, has allowed us to adapt to our environment, and they're important enough that we feel like that we need to pass them on to our progeny or our offspring, okay? And they perpetuate it as well, right? And so hence we've got all the different types of cultures and the different architectures and things like that as a group of people adapted to their environment and then pass that culture on to their offspring and perpetuate it. Now here's the thing though about cultural evolution. It's been way much faster than biological evolution, okay? I mean, you can change a culture. Theoretically, you can change it very quick. You just change any of these in a very discontinuous way, kind of like a caterpillar becomes a butterfly type change. Okay, but biologically, change is continuous and it's long term. It's like planting the acorn seed, and then years later we get an oak tree. Okay. And there's evidence that people from different cultures actually have different minds. They actually perceive things differently. Especially if one came out of a collectivist culture, say like in the East, versus an individualistic type culture, say in the West. Advertisements in the East are more geared towards groups and so forth. And advertisements in the West are more geared towards the individual. Things like that. Actually, different types of beholding reality of the universe out there. Another theme of psychological science, the sixth one, psychological science crosses different levels of analysis. Sort of went over that in the beginning. These four levels reflect the most common. One is biological, then individual, social, cultural. And once again, if we go back, say, let's break it down. Biological level analysis, the physical body contributes to the mind and body, and these would include neurochemical and genetic processes. Individual level analysis, say like differences in personality, and the mental processes affect how we perceive the world. Another level of analysis, and looking at behavior, would be group context, say social. Groups affect people's ways of interacting and influencing each other. And then a cultural level analysis, the different cultures shape the thoughts, feelings, and actions of the people in them. So when we want to look at behavior, there's different levels of analysis that we can marshal in to help us understand the particular behavior or disorder or something along those lines that we're dealing with, okay? Case in point, suicide, biological level analysis. A person might be genetically predisposed to suicide, and that is true. But a person doesn't necessarily, just because of this predisposition, doesn't mean that they're going to commit suicide, but there could be a triggering event in the environment that causes them to take action as opposed to a person that's genetically not necessarily predisposed to suicide. And then you can have a person not genetically predisposed but commit suicide. Okay, it's multi-factor. Individual on that level analysis, he believed he was worthless, felt depressed, he no longer wanted to live. How about a social level analysis? His leader told him to commit suicide. Okay, or a cultural level analysis. In that particular culture, that person's behavior is considered shameful. They became an outcast and therefore committed suicide. So there's different levels of analysis at looking at behavior. Okay. Now, us as amateur psychologists, we don't really do this. We do quick down and dirty assessments of why we see people do the things that they do. Say like driving down the road. You're driving along, somebody cuts you off. What do you think about that person? What kind of names are you calling them and their mama and, all that, right? And you think the worst of them, right? As if you've never cut somebody off. But when you cut somebody off, that person behind you was thinking the same thing, okay? Quick down and dirty. We don't take the time to do levels of analysis. Maybe that person was trying to get to the hospital, the wife was pregnant and about to deliver. You don't know, okay? All right, which of the following would be an example of the biological level analysis? Examining how the death of a spouse results in changes in serotonin, or examining whether a person's personality is enduring or changing across the lifespan, examining how being in a group changes whether a person will engage in illegal behavior, or examining how different cultures define mental illness. Right. Examine how the death of a spouse results in changes in serotonin in the brain. And if you change the levels of serotonin, what might be the result? If the low levels of serotonin could result in what? Anybody know? So here's, the book has a breakdown of different levels and the focus of those levels and then what is studied. So comprehensive way of looking and analyzing behavior. Finally, number 17, we're unaware or often unaware of the influences. We're influenced by subtle factors in the environment, and we're very unaware of it. These factors can influence our thoughts and feelings at an unconscious level, and it's totally out of awareness. And an example of Columbia University, if they show people images of fearful faces and they disappear quickly, that they don't really consciously aware that they saw it, can produce unconscious anxiety that they can then see using a functional MRI. Okay, and then I'm going to show you the last thing before we go. It's a video of a gentleman that used this unaware influences. You'll see it's pretty interesting. It's a trick that magicians use.
Just tell me, like, we started off thinking about the name. We thought it was probably the best thing to do.
They're advertisers.
From there, we banged out a load of ones that were probably completely stupid, and then got down to ones that were slightly stupid, and then we kind of went back and forth for a bit, and then kind of got something we liked to develop it.
Can I have a look?
Sure, go.
All right, so there's a bear and a hawk.
It's a bear with a hawk. There's animal having the best place to dead animals. And it's obviously, you'd see that it was stuffed.
How do you know what the main animal heaven?
We had the idea of the pearly gates of heaven.
It's an idea for a pet cemetery.
Zoo gates. That's the gates of heaven. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
i.e. sort of all the animals that are dead are dead too, if you like, in heaven. And then we just kind of thought, well, it's kind of nice, but it's a big tweet. We wanted to make it a bit funkier. And then we thought, half-named bear, just answered it. It's the brief.
That's fantastic. I do want to show you my own ideas from beforehand.
Okay.
I don't want to touch. Would you open the top?
Sure. Anyways.
I think you'll find this interesting.
Now, this guy drew out beforehand what he thought that they would come up with.
Right. Not a million miles away. Let me put this up there. Over to that. It's a hard playing there.
God.
You've gone for these angel wings here. We think of angel wings or bird wings?
Yeah, well, they were kind of a combination.
You did the top better than me. This was the same thing. I was thinking angel wings there. You've got animal heaven, I've got creature heaven.
Yeah.
Where the best,
a bit off there.
a bit off there. Where the best dead animals go, because you've got blessed both of them.
Now those guys would tend to think, man, this guy's psychic.
It was in my overload, so it's hard to leave
Then
out.
he's going to show you how he
Can I see your
suggested
the other one?
they come up with this idea.
Is it very different?
Well, it's just the gates.
Oh, gentlemen, please.
Doing quite similar.
Look at that. This was the image I was thinking. I've done it there in the background, because this to me was the more striking image. And interestingly, you abandoned this for this one. This was
But the first pair I drew looks exactly like that one. Actually, it did, yeah.
the first baby
Yeah,
Josh, show you on there. Shelley, what have we got?
Well, this is scary, really.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. Look at the cloud, you've got the blue. If you knew the amount of effort that had gone into making this work, you'd be absolutely flabbergasted. But for now, it's comforting to know that you're just as susceptible to subliminal persuasion as the rest of us. Thank you very much for holding yourself.
Thank you.
Martin,
Pleasure.
take care. Thank you very much indeed.
All right, now he's going to show how he suggested these ideas to these two advertisers. Okay?
I immediately thought, I'm gutted. I could see that it was folded, and I just saw the bear's foot hanging over the cloud with a heart. I just thought, I can't believe it. You know, it's embarrassing. But no, I think, oh, fantastic. I love the movie.
We're also very pleased for him.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
He comes up with this looking good, and that's always the main thing.
To see how we did it, watch their taxi journey again.
Put a spell on you. Cause you're mine. You better stop the things you do. I ain't lying. No, I ain't.
So, as they were riding the taxi, they had prearranged for them to be exposed to those different elements. And then those guys get together and they think that they're coming up with these grand ideas and weren't even aware that they had been influenced by the signs, the kids walking with the t-shirt, with the design on the t-shirt, and things like that. And so he knew that they would be influenced by that. He pre-drew out what they were going to come up with. They think they come up with this grand idea, and then there he's showing it to them, basically what they came up with. They're probably thinking, is this guy psychic? But actually he utilized that aspect of we're often unaware of the unconscious influences on our daily behaviors. Okay, we'll see.